Good evening. I'm talking to Racheli Kreisberg at the moment. Racheli is I don't want to say that's the only thing she is, but of course it's a big part of her life. She's the granddaughter of Simon Wiesenthal. Now, Racheli, before we start talking about your very important work at the Simon Wiesenthal Geolocation Initiative, it's a mouthful, SWIGGI. Just tell us a small bit about your grandfather, the well-known, he should be well-known to most people, Simon Wiesenthal, and how you interacted with him in a way.
Yeah. So good evening, Dirk, and it's very nice that you host me. I've known my grandfather for 38 years. I basically grew up with my grandfather being a very important figure already in public life and also having a tremendous career. But I've seen him also, of course, in a family context, and I think that I benefited from both. In terms of his profession, I think that my grandfather is a symbol of dedication. We just saw the game between France and Argentina of fighting for a cause, fighting for something that he deeply believed in, including also teamwork, because he did not do everything alone. He had people working with him. And I think that my grandfather really left a remark on the history.
He definitely did, because I mean, anyone who has the slightest interest in history, and especially the more modern history, talking about World War II and Holocaust, should definitely know Simon Wiesenthal. If they don't, they're not worth them call themselves a history fan or history buff. But so yeah, but just let's talk a bit about your own work now with SWIGGI. How did you get this started, and why did you set it up, the initiative?
Okay, thank you. I used to go a lot to Vienna because my grandparents lived in Vienna while we immigrated from the Netherlands to Israel. So we were living here, visiting my grandparents. And one time I came to visit my grandparents with about 90 pages of testimony of Yad Vashem, because 89 family members of both my grandfather Simon and my grandmother Tzila were murdered. So my ambition was to get those names and deposit them in the Yad Vashem database. But when I got there, my grandfather only gave me 70 names, and my grandfather had a remarkable memory, but of course I had to let it go. In September 2005, my grandfather passed away, and my mother, Paulinka, she enabled the historian Tom Segev to write another biography about my late grandfather. While doing this, as an historian, Tom Segev researched my grandfather's archive. And I asked my grandfather, please send me personal letters. That means letters in which it is cited, dear cousin. It doesn't necessarily mean that people are cousins when they call each other a cousin, but it gave me a sort of a clue. Maybe so it was an opportunity for me to further investigate. I've been doing genealogy research from a very early age. Actually very early, because usually people start researching their family history when the people that you could ask are already not with us. But I did it from an early age on, and I had actually no clue about my grandfather's branch. And while receiving these letters, I was able to understand how is the branch of Simon Wiesenthal put in place. I saw that he was also named after his late grandfather, was also called Shimon. And I will pause for a sec so you can ask another question, because the story continues.
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, and it's actually interesting to hear that, because I started, actually I haven't really started on genealogy, but I have promised finding information on my own grandfather. No, I'm not Jewish, but my grandfather, he was executed, or I have another theory, but I can't collaborate it yet. But he was executed by the Nazis in the Netherlands. So we're not sure exactly why, because there was no apparent reason. Because he had been in the army, and I think he might have been involved in the resistance, but there's no apparent reason. But yeah, this is not about me. This is about you. So we're going back on your work at SWIGGI. how do you? Okay, you got the first bits done, first bit of information of your grandfather, but how did you get other information? Did you get via Yad Vashem or other sources?
So the story goes on like this. So I started focusing on the birth town of my late grandfather. My grandfather was born in Galicia, nowadays in Ukraine, in a small shtetl, a little town called Buchach. But the Wiesenthals are not from Buchach. They're originally from Skala. And I started focusing on Skala Podolska. And while carrying out my research, I actually moved away from the family history and tried to understand who was living in all the houses in Skala. So I created a database. My background is in, among others, in bioinformatics, if you remember the Human Genome Project. So I like analyzing data, and therefore I created a knowledge base of all the houses of the people living in that little town. Now, when you ask yourself, who is my family member, and your name is De Klein, the easiest thing is to look for people carrying your last name. But if you would see that two people were living in the same house, not necessarily carrying the same last name, you can hypothesize that they might be connected. And therefore, I added another way of doing genealogy research by looking now at inhabitants of a given house. Having mapped most of the houses in Skala Podolska, this is 19th century data. Where is that today? So I wanted to see where were these houses today, or the location of these houses. In order to address that, I received cadastral maps. These were maps that were drafted by during the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, and they showed me exactly the exact location of the houses. House number 1 is here on the map. House number 3 is here on the map. Now you have the location of the 19th century houses on a 19th century map. And the next step then is to see how can I superimpose a 19th century map on a Google map of the 21st century. If I georeference them correctly, I can now address this question. Where is the house that stood here, let's say 200 years ago? And if I do that correctly, I can find a location. I now know that there was a house in the 19th century. I know the inhabitants of that house. I can build a family tree. If the people were murdered, I can commemorate them. And therefore, I was able to create, as you said in the beginning, a link between genealogy, family history, and a geolocation.
Okay, and do you find that difficult to kind of translate the 19th century data into the 21st, even with Google Maps? Because I can, especially the last couple of years, things have changed. I mean, in my own country, for instance, Netherlands, a lot of houses that were like the house apartment I grew up in is gone, is demolished, and there's even some. They build other things as well. Did you have any difficulties like that locating the exact location, or is it quite easy? Well, not easy, but is it possible to find the exact spot on the Google while using Google Maps?
It's extremely difficult, but it's possible. I was not the only person doing this. There were several people in parallel. And that group of people actually started working on Skala. Skala was a pilot for that group of people. I work with my colleague called Yossi Beck. He's also from the Netherlands. And Yossi Beck and I started georeferencing not only Skala Podolska, but other shtetls such as Nadworna in the Ukraine, but then also Lodz. We have 250,000 records for the people that lived outside the ghetto before the war and during the war. We have the SWIGGI of Vienna, where we have hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of people that lived in Vienna and passed away in Vienna and are buried in the central cemetery, but also the 65,000 Viennese Jews that were deported and the majority of whom were murdered. And last but not least, we have all the data for the Netherlands. We have the last addresses of the 102,000 Jews that lived in the Netherlands. Some were, of course, originally from the Netherlands, other came from adjacent countries. And we have all that data today. And therefore, we can enable people to find the house, to do what we call heritage, cultural heritage. So if you want to go back, whether virtually or physically, to, let's say, the Netherlands, okay, to Limburg, where you're originally from, that province in Limburg, and you come there and you say, hey, where were all the houses of my family? okay, we can point out 6, 7, 8, 10, 1 houses that are all houses in which your family members resided.
That's I mean, that's it's great that you're able to do that, and because I've seen some of the addresses as well on your website, and I was just blown away that there's so many addresses I recognized. Not so much to people who would live there, but just there's one street, it's the Bloom Market, it's a flower market, is number 7, and I've passed by that house, that building, so many times, thousands of times during my lifetime there. I mean, there's a bakery just on the corner. There's a little supermarket on the other side of the street, and I would have gone shopping there on both sides. And then just to imagine, I passed by that house, which looks like nothing special, but there's such a historical reference to it. And I think that's so important that this kind of work is done, that people can see. It's not just a written record we have, it's actually physical attribute you can address as well, that there's actually something there you can physically touch nearly, and I think that's important. Now, I've been writing a lot about Holocaust the last couple of years, but I have come across quite a few obstacles, and I'm not talking about not getting an address, but just by other people who don't really like digging up things from the past. Have you come across anything like that? I mean, I have to say, I don't want to generalize, but mainly a lot of places in Eastern Europe, I often get emails asking, well, listen, we're not happy with what you're doing. And that's saying it very nicely. So did you ever come across anything like that yourself? Did you get any obstacles, or did people try to stop you get data or retrieve anything else?
No, because I do respect people's privacy. And therefore, when we construct family trees, we will not show records of people that are living. I sometimes do genealogy research, regardless of SWIGGI, for people, and even I find the person they were looking for. But then discovering the entire, or mapping the family, they told me, we prefer you will not show this anywhere. So I respect it. I personally feel for it, but I think it's also fantastic research. There's a lot of satisfaction when it comes to commemorating people that were murdered. I believe that it is true that every person has a name, but I actually think that every person has a family. And if I link a person who was murdered in the Holocaust to a person that is living today, and I show him this person is part of your family, then I create this double link. I link a murdered person to a living person. And in a way, for that murdered person, of course, doesn't know that we're doing this, I feel that we're giving him some kind of continuation in the future that he, of course, was not privileged to live.
Yeah, at least keep the memory alive, even through family members. That's great. Now, just because, as I said, I think this is very important work. How can people help you with getting data? Or is there anything we can do? How can people assist the SWIGGI initiative? And can you just give the full name, because it's the Simon Wiesenthal Genealogy
Geolocation Initiative. It's exactly as you say. So first of all, people can find this on the internet. It's Simon Wiesenthal, one word, Galicia AI from artificialintelligence.com. So you can find the website. People can help us in many ways. First of all, we would like to identify many more families that are associated with the houses that we have. So we have the inhabitants of a given house, but we would like to know who are these people. That means who are their families. And if people would like to help with that, that would be great. The second thing is we can commemorate people. We light digital Simon Wiesenthal Holocaust Memorial candles, and we can all light a digital candle for a person. And not only that we light digital candles, but we also develop personal memorial pages. And you can see that also on the website that I pointed you to.
Yeah.
And
I will be sharing the website on my blog as well, and even on the when I've edited this small bit on the YouTube, I'll have all that information as well, because it is very extremely important that this work continues. So,
yeah.
what is your hope for the future? What do you see yourself in the future doing with or in general? In relation to your work.
Okay, so what I would like the SWIGGI to be implemented. I would like people to use it. So when I go somewhere in one of these countries or sites that I mentioned where we have the data today, it is true that I live a normal life. I go there for work, for business, for pleasure, but I can also stop a second. I can stand next to a house and I can commemorate a person who lived there once. I would like it to be used by schools, because what we do, for instance, we had a project with Italy in which an elementary school researched the fate of Italian children that were murdered. And for that, we didn't have their houses, but the children could get a better understanding of what does it mean when you face a fate of a child and you are not privileged to live like you, but you can commemorate those. And last but not least, I would like it to also to be used as a research tool, because the data that we show today with the visualization of the data as we have it per house, but not only. For instance, for Vienna, we can show on a map the deportation map, where were all the 65,000 Jews of Vienna deported to, and the same for the Netherlands. And therefore, we think that we have also a research tool that can be incorporated in academic research.
Yeah, and definitely would be suitable for that. Anyhow, and yeah, just a lot of people nowadays they think, well, it's history. Well, why should we bother with it? But I've learned in the last couple of years that the one thing we learn from history is that we actually don't learn anything from it unless we actually implement things we have learned, and that's the tricky bit. But I think initiatives like that actually will help just to avoid something like that happening again. So I mean, and I'm pretty sure you probably feel the same. But I don't want anyone to tell me in years to come, when something awful happens, well, why did you say anything? At least I can say, well, I did.
Right.
I did say that. Well, if we're not careful, things might happen again. So at least if everyone can have that bit of awareness, that would be just great. So yeah, this is thanks for this interview, and I'm sure we'll talk again soon, because I'd like to talk a bit more about your grandfather as well at some stage, but I just want to get out the SWIGGI message at this stage, because this is for people for the living, as I say, to have a memory for their relatives as well. So thanks. I'm going to thank you for all of them. So thanks for doing that.
Thank you very much.